Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a super interesting guest with Jerome Stewart. Now, Jerome, you are currently the Chief Marketing Officer at Conviva, and I'll let you talk a little bit about that. But what's interesting is your progression in your career, Microsoft, Salesforce, a number of different companies. You were actually a speechwriter at Microsoft, which that's a real talent. I mean, you're going to tell the story just right. Like, you're hired specifically to make sure you tell the story just the right way. And we're all supposed to be storytellers, right? So I love that background. You've written a couple of books. You actually served, you tell us exactly where, in the Peace Corps. You've lived overseas for a number of years. Maybe if you wouldn't mind just expanding on your background a little bit before we get started.
You did a great job doing that for me. I've had a wonderful, fruitful tech career. That's where I focused most of my energy for the past 25 or so years. Microsoft for 15 years, which was amazing, working out of Seattle, Washington, Redmond specifically, but also overseas with Microsoft for several years, a wonderful adventure. And then moving to the Bay Area and working with both established and up and coming tech leaders, just a tremendous career. And I'm fortunate for all of the experiences that I've had. And I'm not done yet. So I've got some energy left, but you did a good job describing.
Well, thank you. Here's what I want to do. We're going to be talking about today, everybody on every podcast wants to talk about AI, but we're going to take a portion of AI to talk about that the people really, haven't talked about it. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it. It's the shift in moving beyond just workflow automation, right? Which we know it's going to make us much more efficient, right? We know it's going to take all the realms of data, more data than we ever have, and do wonderful, wonderful things with it. But there's a continuing expectation that for us as B2B organizations, that not only are we going to do things faster, we're going to do it better. Like the way that we are judged now in terms of how much value we provide to our clients and how quickly it happens. So we focus a lot on how quickly it happens, but we've really got to move also about how is AI helping us be more strategic? How is AI helping us do things not only faster, but better and higher quality and surpass the expectations that the clients are putting on us or new business, is putting on us. So that's the essence of the conversation here today. And what I'd love to do is just start out, maybe you've got an interesting career background in navigating big shifts in technology. And I'd love to just kind of hear a little bit about that as kind of the foundation for our conversation here today.
Perfect. Yeah. So again, about 25 years in B2B tech, which if you jump back 25 years, we arrived to the sort of commercialization of the internet. That's how I got started. Actually, I worked with a couple small startups in New York City and then San Francisco before leaping, and I was very fortunate to be able to do this, to Microsoft. So again, right about that time that the world was really embracing at scale the internet. Stayed with Microsoft, as I said, for 15 years, experienced the advent of cloud computing. And I remember that, very specifically where I was when I started learning about cloud computing. I actually had an assignment to write a memo on SaaS, which is, like established in every B2B marketer's head very firmly now. But at that moment, I had not heard of SaaS. So writing about SaaS, something that I wasn't familiar with, I remember that quite well. That was a requirement for me to become a speechwriter. Actually, that was one of two assignments that I had. So very much focused on cloud computing for, probably the bulk of the last, it's crazy to say this, but almost 20 years. And then starting to become a little bit more focused, working in a space that's now known as observability. And I did that for about 10 years. And most recently, and this is really worthy of a pause, as I just did, experiencing the arrival of what I refer to as the agentic era. And of course, it's just me saying that, but that's probably my best way to phrase where we are right now in technology. And again, if I look back at just my window, 25 or so years, this one is the biggest. This is a fundamental shift because it is requiring a change in mentality. How do you go about doing your work? And it's a pretty significant shift. So, like I said, in my experience, this is the biggest milestone that I've come across.
So here's what's going to be interesting because right now in your work, you've got an incredible solid base of customers, but you're also pivoting and you're going after a whole new ICP. You're having to build awareness. You're having to build trust from scratch, right? In the world of B2B and especially ABM, it's all about relationships. So in one in one respect, it's an incredible opportunity to create the right relationship, to tell the right story, right? To build trust in the way that you want to, but you're doing it from scratch. Right? So I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts about how you're doing that, especially in the background of the context of AI and market automation and what it's helping us to do these days, how you're thinking about approaching that.
Great question. And it's a pretty broad topic. So I'll just start by saying, Conviva, the company that I'm working with right now, and it's been a pleasure, has been around for quite some time and established its brand, our brand, as the leader in video streaming analytics. So I anticipate that many people are not familiar with Conviva. However, we enter your devices in your homes to ensure that the quality of video streaming from some of the biggest brands in the world, most of the major sports leagues, the largest consumer facing entertainment company in the world. I'm just a little bit hesitant to name drop some of these customers, but I'm definitely very proud of them. But we ensure that the video services that we all use at home and on our devices are delivered with exceptional quality. This approach and the analytics engine that we've used to, again, pioneer video streaming analytics turns out that it is applicable to lots of different use cases. And so my mission has been to first, maintain our focus on media and entertainment and video streaming to ensure that we retain those customers, but then broadening our perspective and broadening our customer base by focusing on net new industries and entirely different use cases. So I'm pleased with the progress that we've made and definitely proud of the team and the company, rebuilding our brand, reforming our brand, everything from, messaging and the narrative to how it comes to life, redoing our website. And this is an iterative process. Basically everything that I say, it's a versioning. So we've made it to a certain degree, we've progressed, but there's always work to do. So again, rebuilding our website, our brand identity, developing content that is about a new form of Conviva in agentic analytics, very, very different. And essentially flooding the market to ensure, for example, that we're training LLMs to think about us differently. That's a new challenge that most of us a couple of years ago hadn't even thought about. Generative AI search, AEO, GEO, that really matters. But of course, everything points to, and I think this is really the critical role for marketers, how are we helping sales? How are we influencing pipeline? So again, I'm proud to have worked with this company during this new pioneering effort as we go into new use cases and industries, and landing our first customers, our first e-commerce customers, our first airline customers, and our first B2B technology customers. Those have all happened since I joined. So it's been a really interesting time and definitely a period of massive transformation for me, as well as for the company.
So I'd love to hear a little bit of the battle stories, right? I'd love to hear a little bit of what have you taken away? Like getting into some of these industries you're talking about are huge, right? SaaS and e-com and airlines and doing that. What did you learn? And you used something, a term that I just loved, which you said, this is an iterative process because we tend to love to do a rebranding, do a repositioning, and then it's locked. I mean, it's locked and loaded, but we all know we keep learning. Every time we talk with customers, we're learning. We're constantly learning. The market's constantly changing. So this idea of iterative is actually an interesting one. But I'll let you kind of take it from there, whatever kind of the question that was.
It's an excellent question. And I'll just, a couple thoughts popped into my mind. So first, just building on iteration. That's I think an important point to embrace, a defining point. So if there's an expectation that at least, again, in this agentic era where most companies in B2B tech are rethinking their approach, and in most cases also sort of reforming their value proposition. If we're all reforming, probably hasty to assume that we can lock ourselves into an approach and then just be done and move forward. Better instead to figure out what direction we want to head in and then embrace iteration, embrace versioning. And this agentic era really facilitates that. There's the ability to constantly improve at a rapid pace our messaging, the output that we're creating. Is it working? Is it not working? What are the outcomes that we're achieving? And then use that in sort of a closed loop fashion to, again, continue to iterate and move forward. So I do think changing the mentality from even things like messaging, this is locked, we're going to settle it for a year and then come back to it. It's better to embrace the concept of iteration and versioning as a mindset. So that would be my first point. The second point, just a reflection on some of the challenges that companies are facing right now, and certainly Conviva. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and regularly I am on 101 Freeway, which is the sort of connective tissue across Silicon Valley from San Jose up to San Francisco, and of course, beyond that. But in that corridor, there's sort of famously a set of billboards that announce the arrival of companies. And across my entire career, it's always been the case. These 101 billboards are a thing. They also indicate the sort of flavor of the era, the tech flavor of the era. So right now, many or most of those billboards are talking about this agentic era. And if every company's talking about, how that company is helping other clients move into this new phase, how then do you stand out? We're often using many of the same words. It's really hard to distinguish one brand from the next. And so I think that creates a real important pause moment for marketing teams to really dig into a few things, a few basic topics. One, who are the customers that you really care to engage with? Who are those target accounts? Who are the ICPs that you really care about? Make sure that you're thoughtful and precise on answering that question. And then, for example, how are you differentiated as a company? Again, we're all using the same language. We're using the same kind of grab bag of messaging tricks. But one area that each company needs to focus on is indeed, how is that company differentiated? What is the moat? And so that's something that, for example, I think really distinguishes Conviva in this agentic era. And we're digging into what our moat is. And that then creates critical elements for messaging and the rest of marketing to build on.
Wow, a lot to unpack there. So tell me a little bit about, in this world of ABM and AI coming together, where, human in the loop, something we've all been talking about forever, but you kind of double down on the fact that the human in the loop in the process of ABM should never be replaced, right? And that relationships are at the foundation for ABM. If you are not known, if you are not trusted in advance of day one of the vendor list, the short list being created, you're out, right? And that's been proven a number of times in a number of different studies. So how do you become known and trusted? And that's where the relationship comes in. And how does that work together with an agentic AI strategy?
Yeah. So I'll just reiterate one of the points, which I think is a good starting point. It's, when it comes to the narrative and the story for each company, make sure, I guess, a couple things are true. First, that differentiation is well articulated, and then think forward a couple steps. I think this is important for all of us right now. How can AI models and LLMs disrupt what it is that we're doing? And so ensure that, again, that there is a defensible moat, that not just our commercial competitors, but also those sort of broader LLM models, that it's not easy for them to, snap in and replace us. So I think that that's a really important starting point. But back to your question on account-based marketing, again, at least for us, and I think many B2B companies, the deal size can be relatively large and the sales cycle can also be long. So over-reliance on things like email to not just establish brand awareness, but sort of create that multi-touch engagement with accounts, I think that that's dangerous. I start my day, probably like a lot of other people, deleting dozens of, yeah. I'm just attacked almost every day by these different companies trying to break into me and break into the organization. So there might be a role for emails and broad advertising to establish that first level of brand awareness. But if you're really trying to engage with humans, you got to think, differently. How are you going to connect with the individuals within those accounts that really matter to you and to your business? It can't be some, mass AI produced email that's doing that for you. You have to think about, for example, analog touch points. A lot of companies, and I think this is probably a wise train of thought, are sending direct mail. It's like, great, grabbed your attention somehow, perhaps, but let's make sure that we keep that attention. So here's something interesting that you're going to care about. It could be a thoughtful piece of research, maybe couple it with some interesting swag so that they're thinking about you in the context of thought leadership, but also keeping the brand top of mind. So I think things like direct mail can definitely matter. I also believe in the power of the handshake, finding ways to get in front of the humans that really matter and establishing those personal connections. Once you have that, once you have a personal connection, it's a lot easier to just, continue to sort of build on it, pull that string, the relationship string, to make sure that you're progressing forward. So once you have that human contact, build on it. And then, entertainment, showing up to the right event in person. I think that those touch points really matter, in addition to all things digital and all things AI.
The human touch points that's traditionally the things that go back in our careers, right? Where marketing automation was just everything, right? How do we scale? How do we scale? And human touch points are hard to scale. But I got to tell you, I can't tell you how many like CROs I've talked to on this podcast that are like, Steve, I'm getting back out on the road. I hadn't done that in a while, right? I'm getting on the road and I'm going out and I'm having dinners and I'm shaking hands and I'm meeting with people. And not only as a introduction strategy, as a new business strategy, but as a client retention strategy as well. The idea of reconnecting and making that personal human connection. And not one of them said, and I have an amazing report that I'm bringing with me. None of them said, and we worked like crazy to obviously they're going out and they're prepared to have a good conversation, right? But it was the human connection that you're talking about was the number one priority. Yeah. So I'd love to take this in a little bit of a different way here. We talked early about how AI can assist in all of this, right? And being in those human connections and just being more in the know, understanding them, understanding their world, their challenges is actually to a certain degree a lot easier than it ever has been before. So AI really helps in that human connection, right? But more than just efficiencies and knowledge, we talked earlier about strategy, about how do we take this into another level and how does it make us smarter so that we do better work, we deliver more value and not just quicker, that makes us more strategic, has us deliver better outcomes, not just be more efficient, but deliver better outcomes because that's the expectation, right?
Yeah. No, excellent. Now, first, I have been working with AI focused companies for the past several years, really pivoting my career almost a decade ago to really center on AI. Having said that, 2026 is a different year. It's the start of something that I think is going to define our future. And again, it's happening right now. So the last few months, because here we are just in April, the last few months have been really astonishing. So for people who are listening and saying, oh my gosh, I'm a little bit behind, you're not that behind. I mean, there's really a good opportunity to jump in. You also hit on a couple really key concepts, key points: efficiency, speed of delivery. AI is making all of this possible. In this, last few months, and I said 2026 for me is a milestone year, I have transition my thinking. If I jump back to even past December, we had a pretty significant product launch here at Conviva. Very proud of what we were able to accomplish. And we were using AI. We were using ChatGPT and and Gemini and different tools to help us expedite our production. But in 2026, I pivoted to a different focus. It's how can marketing develop those workflows and those systems? It's much less about the input that we are creating as humans, and it's much more about creating systems that capture inputs from multiple sources and then use those to generate interesting, for example, assets. Easiest example would be anything related to words. The process has changed a little bit, but you establish a messaging foundation, which again, we could talk about messaging as just one example. I won't get into that in a ton of detail, but using, for example, articles that are written about a company, using, third-party analyst reports that are written about a company, also interesting insights from sales, messages that work to open doors with clients, put those into an LLM, they become the messaging framework. And then from there, it's really easy to produce outputs like blogs, longer form content, social media posts, all sorts of different things. So I think the word paradigm, anything related to words, I think people are starting to get this. For me, a couple other leaps forward have been creating workflows and processes to develop things like videos. And I have to give a shout out to our CRO and the sales team. We issued a challenge to the organization saying, hey, who can build the best explainer video using AI? And certainly there's a lot of AI slop, floating out there, AI videos that feature people like you and I that look just like you and me, Steve, but you can tell that it's not us. It's an avatar and the voiceover is a little bit messed up. But again, issuing the challenge to our sales team resulted in the creation of some really elegant on brand videos that blew my mind. And so I went from thinking AI is ready for words to now thinking AI can also do multimedia. So in terms of content creation, I think, embracing AI workflows and systems, that's something for all of us to lean into. But again, on the other side, there are ways to use AI on demand gen to create pipeline. But I would also just pause and say that's where the human element really becomes important. You can't just rely on AI to accomplish all of marketing. I think you need to ensure that humans are in the loop, determining what is good and what is bad, determining when are you overdoing it with AI? When do you need to have a sales rep reach out, which needs to happen pretty regularly, by the way. But when do you insert the human to ensure quality and consistency remain intact? I think that's an important question.
Here's something that we never even talked about before. Inserting human into the loop has so many benefits. There's one major drawback. Humans don't trust other humans. And in fact, if you look at like the LinkedIn Trust Barometer, 32,000 respondents worldwide, 68% think that you and I as business leaders are being intentionally misleading. So there's an opportunity, absolutely, with personal touch, human connections, but AI has two opportunities. One is the whole world can just take the information that's out there, personalize it to industry, to vertical, to company, and do a lot better job. And then we all start looking more and more the same. Or AI can actually help assist the human, right, in being more knowledgeable and creating connections and building trust. The last point on this is that Forrester came out in November for their 2026 projections, and they said that it's all about trust. Trust is the currency to get you into the deal, win the deal, keep the deal, right? So how does AI help in building trust? A very human thing that's a big part. That's why we do that human connection, right? Is to build that relationship, build that trust. So we buy from who we know and trust.
A few things to react to. And so first, we're fast friends now, Steve. So I'm stepping on some thin ice if I just challenge one of the statements that you made. I would agree that humans, we have a tendency to maybe not trust some of the companies that are selling to us. It's pretty easy to see like, oh, they're just selling to me. So humans not trusting companies and AI representing brands and companies, that can be effective to a certain point, but then to establish trust, I would actually, and I'd have to understand this research a little bit better, but human to human interaction, that's where trust happens. And so Steve, like you reaching out to me and you and I connecting as we did before this discussion, that helped establish trust with me. And now I'm more prone to, want to engage with you moving forward. And so AI representing a brand, I think it can only go so far. AI to tee up human interaction, now that's good. AI to help us humans do our jobs better at a higher quality level and certainly faster, that's also interesting. And so those are the types of points that I would drill into. Maintain that humanity, maintain, as we've talked about, that human touch, and then you use AI to help break in and help expedite. And as I said, even help increase the quality. Interesting side comment. How many amazing writers are there right now? There's a plethora of amazing writers. And those people probably got C minuses in their English class. Thanks to LLM. So,
Well, so I have one last question, but a comment first, because I kind of threw something out there that was like a little bit controversial. So I'm glad you kind of like wrangled me around a little bit. But there's a very real trend that's happening in the B2B world is that the buyers are waiting longer and longer want to talk to us, right? Because they don't want to be pitched. And so part of what we're doing is we're utilizing a greater amount of resources within that aren't sales oriented. Chief product officers, chief marketing officers, right? Customer success, CEOs, right? Because these are non-sales threatening, non-pitch ways to create connections. And so if you go back in our careers, right, it was very common for marketing to say, got a lead, I'm just going to pass it off. Now it's gone to sales organization. They close leads, right? It's no longer, it doesn't work that way anymore, right? It takes a village, right? To raise a child. It takes an entire company to close a deal. And so I love the fact that you're talking about human connections and relationships. But part of what I took away from that is we have to think about how we utilize the relationships that we have to offer up in unique and different ways than we have in the past as well.
there's something else that you're suggesting that I think is absolutely critical. Another big reflection for me, and this is certainly true with smaller companies like the one that I currently work with, but I think this is applicable to the Microsofts and the Salesforces where I used to work. And it is, what is our role as a business professional, as a marketer? And purposefully, I start with business professional too, because I think we have to think about ourselves in the context of the broader business, whatever it is that we're doing. But in the past, many of us existed in sort of a siloed function. You're a content person, you're a demand gen person, whatever, you're a product marketer. But I now think that we need to look to the left and to the right of our function and think more in generalist terms. And as you said, as a marketer or as a product person, what is our role in the context of moving the business forward? And if we're just, doing our job and then handing it off to the person next to us and then saying, okay, I don't care anymore, that's dangerous. I think make sure that what it is that you're doing, that you're aware of the overall impact on business, on sales, and don't just let go. Like if you're a content person, did that asset that you created, did it move the needle? How many people engaged with it? What did sales say about it? Were they using it in their sales engagement? Follow it all the way to the end. And I think that's a really important mindset shift. And the value of generalist skills is also increasing. AI can knock out, certain functions, but that expertise that comes from the ability, or from experience, having seen and witnessed outcomes from attempted marketing campaigns, I think that that's really important. So look to the left, look to the right. Don't just be that siloed individual. Think more in generalist terms.
So here's my last question. We've covered so much territory here, right? Our poor human brains, we only can take in about 2 or 3 things at a time and retain it, right? And then a half an hour later, it's probably going to be one. What's the one thing that you want other B2B C-suite executives to take away from our conversation today? If it was just one thing you could say.
Don't forget about the human touch, and don't forget that all of these businesses are built around humans, the employees, and built to service other humans. Definitely embrace AI, but don't squash humanity in the process.
Oh, I love that. Here's what's interesting is, the mission of this podcast is to bring different perspectives, different insights, different ways to look at the same challenges that we all have. And if we can do that, then it's like the rising tide that lifts all boats. And this was an amazing part of that rising tide today. And Jerome, I just wanted to say thank you for coming on.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And one of my favorite concepts is what you just said. It's when the tide rises, all of the boats rise. So that's really a mission that I share. So thanks for the opportunity to connect with you and the audience.